for some people, their values have shifted. So in the work that you do you see that why do those values shift? And are people really aspiring to be what others want them to be, or who they want to be themselves? Well, help us understand this.
If I believe my life today is a product of the choices I made yesterday, if I believe that, then there's two things that drive decision making. One is how I manage myself emotionally. The second is what you're talking about, and that's moral competence. Using a set of values to guide my decision making. So if I want to be a better decision maker, I got to manage myself emotionally, and I got to use my values. And so if you believe values are important and you believe that values guide decision making, knowing your values would be really important.
You are listening to Personalization Outbreak, a podcast about the collapse of traditional corporate standards in today's more personalized world. I'm Glenn Llopis. I'm a leadership strategist, author, contributor to Forbes, and founder of the Leadership in the Age of Personalization movement. On this show, I'm interviewing executives across multiple sectors to find out how the balance between standardization and personalization can exist. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to Personalization Outbreak. We're in season 5. Wow. This is episode 98. We're getting close to 100. And I'll tell you, I'm so excited for what's going to happen on the show today. You know, I think if we take a moment to reflect on what's happening, I mean, the world really needs positive leadership more than ever. People are tired, frustrated, suppressed. But here's the good news, guys. There's a large untapped source of leaders who can change the world for the better. They just need to be unleashed. Did you ever think it was you, whether you're in a leadership role or not? Well, you're going to find that out with our guest today, Doug Lennick, CEO, and Chuck Wachendorfer, President of Distribution at Think to Perform. Not only share those who make up that large untapped source of leaders that can change the world for the better, but they're also going to share some very fresh but timely, incredibly timely leadership insights from their new book, Don't Wait for Someone Else to Fix It. Right here. Don't wait for someone else to fix this. No, seriously. Look, I've been asking myself, why is it that I always get so sucked? Well, not always, but get sucked in to other people's problems to the point where now they become my own. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, because that's, as we know, our listeners, that's what standardization does to you. It sucks you in. But this book, I highly recommend it. And it's really going to help you tap into the power of your influence, because you're more influential than you think you are. And that's going to help you pursue a meaningful purpose, whether it's your job, in the community, or even at your home. So before we get started, please click the like button below, share it with your colleagues, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and social media at Glenn Llopis. Doug and Chuck, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having us, Glenn. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, hey, Chuck, and thanks for your time. I know that you and I spent some time getting to know each other. What a fascinating background you have, and the way you and Doug met each other. How did both of you get to this point in your careers? I mean, for you guys to be wanting to teach and grow, help others grow and evolve in their careers and in their lives, that means you care a lot. So what is it that got you to this point?
You know, I think both Doug and I share a passion for helping people. We mentioned how we met. We probably met 35 years ago or more. And we met because we were in the financial planning industry. And I know my background, as you and I discussed when we first met, was engineering. And part of the reason I left engineering was I didn't feel like what I was doing was making a difference for anybody. And I didn't want to work 40 years or more of my life and not have it stand for anything. And so I think financial planning, and we started to work for America, what was a company that was purchased by American Express, financial planning allowed us the ability to make a difference in other people's lives. And Doug was legendary at the time, still is legendary, but specifically at my point in the career in terms of developing people. And I was very interested. You can see I'm surrounded by sports memorabilia that, of people that performed at their best, made great decisions under pressure. And so I connected with Doug. I reached out to him because he was somebody that I wanted to learn from. And he was gracious enough to spend time with me and another colleague of mine. Didn't know us from anybody. But again, back to this wanting to make a difference orientation that Doug had, and then he helped me develop. I think that's where our kind of our relationship started.
You just reminded me of something that I didn't really connect the timing of until this conversation right now, because when Chuck and I met, it was in the mid 1980s, and I had written a book that most of the writing I had done in the mid 1970s, but it was published in the 80s. It was called A Simple Genius You, and it was about you. And what Chuck was talking about is, philosophically, my whole approach has always been individuals have a responsibility to do something toward the world around them. And that included me, it included everybody. And so we've always had this philosophy, and Chuck and I have shared this philosophy, that if you focus on helping people be the wonderful person that they could be, if they realize, hey, there's a lot of goodness in me, there's a lot of potential in here. And if we can help them bring that out, that does a great deal for them and for us. And so we've been fortunate, and Chuck and I were fortunate that Richard Leiter wrote the foreword to our book, and he's done that once before. But he's the power of purpose, and I would simply say, for me, I've just been blessed to be able to try to live out a life. I have a purpose. My purpose is to help myself and others, you guys and everybody listening, help myself and others achieve our highest and greatest potential. So that's it.
So Doug, why is it that standardization limits people from doing that? Because let's face it, trying to find our full potential has been a narrative out there for years. Why is it? What is it that, these standardized organizations that don't account for what matters to the individuals, why does that almost takes over the individual's identity?
Well, I will simply say this: it's easy. That's why it's easy. And that's one of the concerns that we have now as we look at the world. It's easy to let artificial intelligence do your thinking. It's easy. It's easy to let somebody else tell you when to come to work. It's easy to let somebody else tell you what to do when you get to work. It's easy to let somebody tell you when your breaks are. All that stuff is easy. It's hard to decide what to do every day. It's like, that's hard. You mean I have to decide what to do and when we start? Yeah, this is your life. And what Chuck and I are basically saying is the world has polarized clearly, and people are pointing fingers, blaming you're wrong, and then pointing their finger the other way, and you should fix it. And what we're saying is, hey, don't wait for somebody else to fix it. And your whole program, Personalization Outbreak, you've been doing this for 5 years. Good for you. We've been writing this book for 5 years, or a little bit, right around there, a little bit longer. But it took us a while to write this book. And the concept and the tools, these really are 8 essentials if you want to recognize that you are influencing the world. And you can either be good at it or not, but you're going to be doing it either way.
Well, and you're also making it very clear. Look at yourself in the mirror and know that you are your most immediate opportunity. So what are you going to do with it?
Right. Michael Jackson.
Go ahead, Chuck.
A really big theme in the book is self-awareness. You talked about looking in the mirror. And so we have what's called, and we talk about this in the book, the leadership logic chain. And the leadership logic chain is, if I want to do a more effective job at influencing other people, if I want to be more effective with others, more effective with even with my money, it begins with me managing my own behavior. Managing my own behavior is connected to my decisions I make. So we're big about decision making. We talk about that in the book. Decision making has twice the impact on our performance than talent and skill combined. And we make about 35,000 decisions a day. So the choices I make in my life every single day really matter to where my life ends up. My life today is a product of the decisions I made yesterday.
Exactly.
And if I want to make better choices, it begins by me paying attention to myself. That's the self-awareness part. That requires courage. That requires responsibility, right? And so that's hard to do, back to what Doug was saying. Sometimes I don't like taking responsibility for my life because it would be easier for me to blame somebody else. But successful people focus on what they can control. And there's only one thing that we can control, and that's ourselves. That's our decisions, and that's our behavior.
Well, and I think you just brought me back to when I was attending UCLA. And this is what I learned by going to college, that in life, you have to learn how to do the things that you don't like doing. And I share this because let's jump into the book here. And let's not forget that we're going to have to talk about those untapped resources of leaders. In fact, let's just address this right now. Who do we need to unleash when you say that fortunately there's a large untapped source of leaders who can change the betterment? Who are those people?
Everybody listening to us today are those people. And everybody not listening to us today. And there's probably, hopefully there's more listening to us than not, but that's the deal. It's everybody, literally. That we mean that, because the whole concept of leadership is leadership as we define it is that which one does to influence another. Influence another. How do I influence the behavior of someone else? Leadership is about influencing, and followership is about being influenced. And all of us are both. We're both leaders and followers. So all we are saying is own it. Own it. You are whether you accept it or not. I remember years ago, he doesn't think this anymore, but Charles Barkley once said he doesn't want to be a role model. Well, he got over that because he figured out, I guess I am a role model, whether I declare or don't. And everybody is a role model, whether they declare or not. We just use praise for people who are good role models, but you might be a miserable one or a great one, but you're a leader.
You know, I always tell people every day someone has a perception of who you are, whether you know that someone's paying attention to you or
Absolutely.
not. They are. Which means what? Consequently, they're going to have an expectation of you. Our job as individuals is to influence that narrative so that our narrative isn't being defined by other people. It's being defined by ourselves, which takes us into these 3 questions that you guys talk about in the book about reframing your future. So I really, right now we're at a time of, tremendous, like you said, Doug, polarization, but also during this age of personalization, going through a lot of reinvention, because now I, as an individual, need to take ownership of my own behaviors, my own abilities to influence and help people. In other words, what a novel concept that we have to be more interconnected, interdependent than ever before if we're going to advance forward. So, but that might ring true to the 3 of us, but for a lot of people, that's a heavy lift. So, they're in this process of reinvention. So what are those 3 questions to reframe our future? And why are those questions so important?
Well, I'm going to take a run. I saw Chuck had given you some great answers to it, which I love. And they do start right with, who am I ideally? Kind of is that first big question. Ideally, who am I? And related to that question is, ideally, I am a person of purpose, and I am a person who recognizes I have praiseworthy values. So at an ideal level, I'm like a wonderful guy. That's, and truly everybody listening. Ideally, there isn't one person that's listening to us now that would say at an ideal level, I'm a dirtball. No one would say that. Everybody would say at an ideal level, I am wonderful. So we have to ask ourselves, who am I ideally? And related to that, what is my purpose? What are my values? And then who am I really? Who am I really? Like, and is there a gap? Now, there will be from time to time. Nobody is their ideal self all the time. But if I can pay attention to myself, I can learn to be my ideal self more often. And that's the third question I would ask. First question, who am I ideally? Second question, who am I really? Third question, what, if anything, am I going to do about it?
So on that note, let's go to you, Chuck. I know that when we spoke in preparation for our segment today, the importance of values. I mean, for some people, their values have shifted. So in the work that you do you see that why do those values shift? And are people really aspiring to be what others want them to be, or who they want to be themselves? Well, help us understand this.
Those are great questions, Glenn. Here's what I'd start with. And I go back to decision making.
Mm.
If I believe my life today is a product of the choices I made yesterday, if I believe that, then there's two things that drive decision making. One is how I manage myself emotionally. So emotional competence matters. The second is what you're talking about, and that's moral competence. Using a set of values to guide my decision making. So if I want to be a better decision maker, I got to manage myself emotionally, and I got to use my values. But when you ask people if they have values, they act kind of insulted, like you think they don't. But that leads to the second question, which is, what are they? And that's where it gets kind of fuzzy. People kind of look away and they go, family, honesty. And so if you believe values are important and you believe that values guide decision making, knowing your values would be really important. And so we talk about a process to help you discover your top 5 values. Why 5? Because it's what most people can remember. And if I can remember my values, I'll use them when making choices. And as I said earlier, we make 35,000 decisions a day. If we made 1 or 2 better choices a day, we're talking about 500, 600, 700 better decisions a year. And so we talk about the values exercise in the book, but you can go to Think to Perform's website and take the values exercise for free. I think we've had 120,000 people from 146 different countries complete the values exercise on Think to Perform's website. And so it tells us people really want to know and understand their values. But to your question around how do I know when my values change? Usually it's a life event. I graduate from college, I get married, I have kids, I retire, I have a health event, I have a heart attack. Those are things that wake us up to what's really important. But if I don't have to wait for a life event, and I can go to the values exercise at thinktoperform.com and complete it, well, now I can today to start guiding my decision making.
Yeah, by the way, this is, since I can give a little commercial message, I'm gonna thanks for mentioning the exercise, because one of the things that we've discovered is if your listeners go to Google, just Google values card exercise, just Google it. If you do it yourself, Glenn, you'll find that Think to Perform will be one of the top 2 or 3 pop-ups in the world. And as Chuck said, people all over the world are telling us what they care about. And interestingly enough, human beings share similar values. So we think values have the potential to be a great unifier in the world, in a world of polarization. So like the number 1 value in the world right now, at least based on 100,000+ people that we've seen do the response, is family by a landslide all over the world. Number 2 in the world is health. People want to, and 3 is happy. People want to be happy. They want to be healthy. They want to care for their families, just like we do in Minnesota, Lake Wobegon, where everybody's above average.
So let me, Doug, let me jump in here for a minute. So, Chuck, I want to go back to you. Values, what you said earlier on, self-awareness. Do people really think about their values when making those decisions?
That's the point that we make in the book, Glenn. I think, in fact, when we've taken thousands of people, not just on our website, but even in our work face-to-face, over the last 20 years at Think to Perform, we probably had tens of thousands of people take the values exercise live. And so what we advocate is using and knowing and using your values as you think about your time or your money or your resources. If I say these things are important to me, then I'd want to make sure my behavior, back to what Doug was saying earlier, my behavior aligns with what I say is important to me. But if I'm unclear about what's important to me, I got to figure that out. That's where the values exercise helps. But it is about knowing and using it.
Okay, so next question, and if you guys could just give me a quick answer so we can move on, because I got two follow-ups to this. Sure. Reframing your future. So there was a couple things that I saw in the book. One of them was, what direction would I like to take the rest of my life? What's the most common response to that question, Chuck or Doug?
I don't know that there is a common response, but I think most people want to know that their lives stood for something. And usually it's standing for something good. Not always, but usually. I don't know what percentage is. Most people want to know that their lives mattered to their family, to their company, to their neighborhood, to their community, to their friends.
How about the next question? Where would I like my life to end up?
That's a question I think that is scary to a lot of people. I learned years ago there's two types of future. There's our probable future and there's our possible future. Our probable future is if I project my life from this day forward, I'll probably be living in Denver. I'll probably be with Think to Perform. All these like extensions of where I am today. What matters is our possible future. We want to think about our life in reverse. So if I'm going to live to, let's say, 95 years old and I'm 63 today, what do I want the next 32 years to stand for? That takes some responsibility and it takes some self-examination to think about, where do I want to end up? Most people don't take the time to think about that.
This goes back to how we're in an identity crisis, that when institutions have defined us for so long, the kind of things you're talking about, they're hard for people to internalize because they haven't been asked.
Well, most people think they don't even realize they are the hub of their life. So if you think about, most people think the hub of their life is their job or there is something else. But if you put, Glenn Llopis Enterprises as the hub, that's the hub. Everything else are spokes. And Chuck mentioned it. I'll just give 3 words, just push it real clear. Purpose, time, money. What's your purpose? How do you want to use your time? And how do you want to make and use your money? You talk about resources, time, money. Those are our resources. Now, what most people, and this is true, most people don't truly face the truth about life, which is it begins, it progresses, it ends. And we don't face that this is our life. One of our good colleague, friend of ours, often says, don't be late for your life. Don't be late for your... And this is it. And we don't know how long we're going to get. And so we want to make decisions every day so that we make the most of what we've got. And we have an obligation, a human obligation. We were born with it. And that is, we won't get the happiness we want unless we're doing something for somebody else. That's the rule. It's a universal law. I'm sorry if you don't like it.
No, well, so let's go back to the book here. You point out that the common errors that people make when assessing who they are and how to develop a more accurate picture. What are those most common errors, and what's your advice about developing the more accurate picture?
Well, I think, every pattern in life is a pattern because at some point it worked for us. What happens is as we get older, our lives change. Some of those patterns begin to hold us back. And
Hmm.
so, in order to take my life in a different direction, I got to be able to understand which are the patterns that are helping me, which are the patterns that are holding me back. So, years ago, I worked with a woman who was very, very successful financially, made a lot of money, and was miserable. And your listeners may know some of those people. She worked all day long, worked a 12-hour day, had a stay-at-home husband, had two adult children that stayed at home. She was about 100 pounds overweight, didn't eat all day long, didn't exercise, came home at about 8 o'clock, ate one large meal a day, and went to bed. And so we were talking about this pattern of not taking care of herself. And I asked her, Sharon, where did you learn that taking care of yourself didn't matter? And without any hesitation, she said, I was raised by a single mom. And when I was 7 years old, my mom came down with cancer. And so from 7 years old until 11, when my mom died, I took care of my mom. And that was a pattern Sharon needed to survive at that time. But
Hmm.
but Sharon was in her 50s now. And that was a pattern she continued for the next 45 years of her life. And so when she realized that's what worked with her when she was a child, because it's the opposite of what most children learn. Most children have their parents take care of them. She learned she took care of her mom. She was able to start seeing how that worked then. It's not working for her now. But it took changing the questions she was asking herself. It begins with self-awareness. It begins with understanding where that pattern came from, and then deciding what if anything, you want to do about that.
Isn't it interesting how all this comes back to self? It all
Oh,
comes back to self.
yeah.
And so let's extend this question to another one I really like. This whole section in the book around let go of what you know. I mean, again, this seems to be another key for reinventing oneself. So how does one detach their identity from what they know enough to be able to let go of what they know?
Well, I might just say one little thing to start conversation. I love this part of I love the question. We talk about knowing is the enemy of learning. And it's really true. And my dad, who passed away a number of years ago, on his gravestone, he had me write the words, and yet I am still learning. And it's really a big deal that we learn this even in science. Even, the table of elements were all they were until they discovered some more.
Hmm.
I mean, that's just the way it is. The universe was what it was until they discovered more. Knowing is the enemy of learning. We have to start with that awareness. And if we do, it allows for us to begin to let go of what we know and begin to at least appreciate that truth has many colors, reality has many sides. And there is no one person who sees all the colors and all the sides. So I have to be able to let go of what I see. So, like if we hung a ball between us, and your hemisphere of that ball was blue and mine was red. Not that we have blue and red states, but we do. But if yours was blue and mine was red, and someone said, "What color is the ball?" What would you say? You would say blue. And I would say red. And Chuck's there looking at it, noticing, hey, that's a red and a blue ball. It's not red, it's not blue. And so we've got to start with we don't know it all, never did, never will. And I'll pass to Chuck because
Well, I think just to pile on a little bit, things change, and so we talk in the book. One of the 8 essentials, as Doug mentioned, is letting go of what you know. It's learning agility. And you mentioned something earlier, Glenn, about doing things that we don't like to do. Oftentimes, doing things that I don't like to do is because I'm uncomfortable or I'm not as good at them. But in order to grow, I have to be willing to do things that make me uncomfortable. And to Doug's point, I learn as a result of doing things that I don't already know. That helps me grow personally, and it could help me become more effective.
So Chuck, how do we get leaders to let go? I mean, we're talking now about we need more self accountability, that we ourselves need to be more in touch with who we are, how we show up, and own it. But yet we go to work and I want to be accountable to myself and how I could influence more. But my leader says, hey, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but you just stay over there in that little box that you've been designated and do your job. And I'm thinking, wait a second, I just spent some time with Doug and Chuck and I believe them, but yet my leader can't let go. What's your advice for that person that feels like their leader continues to limit their ability to unleash and influence more?
And there's plenty of leaders that still think that way. We've been talking about, traditional leadership roles, traditional leadership, traditional titles. Leadership, back to Doug's point, is for all of us, right? So we're trying to unleash and help people around the globe. We wrote this book for anybody, anywhere, to help them lead a better life. So if my leader chooses to not allow me, wants me to stay in my lane, I still look for where I can influence. That's back to what I can control. And that's only me in that bucket. So where can I positively influence him or her, my other colleagues, and make a difference even in the lane that I have?
And that's really the answer. I said, is what Neil Diamond said. And I am. I really have what I have. And we talk about three pots. Pot one, Chuck's alluding to this, are those things I control. Pot two are those things I influence, and pot three are those things I neither control nor influence. So the idea here is to stay as much as I can in pot one, because I discover the better I handle pot one, the more influence I have in pot two. I discovered I could influence my superiors in the organizations I worked in because I was a great performer. They listened to me more. It was the weirdest thing. Other people might have had great ideas, but they didn't handle their own lane, as Chuck is saying. Do what you do really, really well, and then I'll be interested in your point of view.
Part of the reason my leader may not be listening to me may have something to do with me, not just with him or her, right? And so that's what we're talking about, is I have to be willing to look in the mirror and take some responsibility and ownership for it. It may be that he or she is not open to anybody's feedback, but it also may be how they're not open to my feedback and how I've influenced or affected that.
Well, guys, look, I want to thank you for being here. We could talk all day long. I want to, again, highly recommend that you guys get a copy. Not you guys wrote it, but that our listeners and viewers get a copy of this book. Again, don't wait for someone else to fix it. It's on you. And what I'm walking away with is the more that you can focus on you to be a better person, to influence and be in service of others, you will get discovered, and then you'll be prepared to seize the opportunity when it comes. Because far too often we rely on other people to create the opportunities for us. But when we take ownership of our own behavior, of who we are as individuals, and begin to influence, like Doug said, within the confines of what we have the ability to influence, you'll get discovered. Is it harder? Yes. But is it the right thing to do? You bet it is. Why? Because that kind of behavior is sustainable. And you can teach those behaviors instead of cutting corners and relying on people that actually don't have a clue on knowing who you are. And then maybe you're getting promoted into the wrong role based on others' perceptions of you. So guys, listen, I really want to thank you. You guys have given us some powerful tools to help people understand what Personalization Outbreak is all about. So appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for your time. Chuck, Doug, let me do this. Let me give you each like 30 seconds. Any closing remarks? Chuck, let's start with you.
I think this is a journey that I read something the other day that people are in search of purpose and meaning in their lives. And I just flip that around that is do something that's purposeful and meaningful to other people for other people. I mean, I think I just leave it at that.
Perfect. Doug?
I'm just going to encourage everybody to go take a peek at who they are ideally. Go do our online values exercise and be thoughtful and be honest with yourself. Ideally, what kind of person do you want to be? It's going to take you about 10, 15 minutes. It's free.
Thanks, guys.
Go there.
Thank you, Doug. So on that note, when you lead in the age of personalization, you will see things that others don't, do what others won't, and keep pushing when prudence says quit. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Chuck. We'll be in touch. Thanks for listening to Personalization Outbreak. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. If you enjoyed the content, visit ageofpersonalization.com to check out our free streaming video series and learn how to get involved in the movement. I'm Glenn Llopis. I wish you a good day, and remember, without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution.